When you're building a database, it's incredibly important to start with the end in mind. Very often, we see situations where someone wasn't being thoughtful upfront when they were planning out their database, and they get into a tail wagging the dog situation where they'll start building different pieces of the database that are not actually useful. So what you want to avoid is building because you can and making sure that you're building features that you actually need. When I talk about starting with the end in mind, what I mean is you have to understand what is your ultimate goal you're trying to reach. It could be to get better reporting to help you make better decisions. It could be to improve your forecasting so you can plan out your revenue and cash flows. Or it could be to improve your operations internally so that you can be more cost efficient. An important thing to do at this stage is to write down the goals for your database. The reason why I emphasize planning so much at this stage is because I want to make sure you're solving the right problems. I also want to give you a concrete example. In our previous database we worked on, our client decided to create 20 different calendar views, and that ultimately didn't serve the purpose because their team got very confused. What we discovered in our design phase of the project was that the team actually needed an internal approval process, so all of their calendar views actually were not helping them. So going back to that tail wagging the dog analogy, we want to make sure we're building features that are actually useful for our team and not just building things because we can. So now you might be thinking, that's great, Cherry. I obviously want to be solving the right problems, but how do I know what's the right problem to solve? When you're trying to figure out what it is that you should build inside of Airtable, it takes a little bit of experience and practice. So I've summarized 8 questions that I often ask my clients in our consulting practice. The first question is, why do you want to build this database? You can form your own hypothesis first about why this database is important to you. And then when you talk to your friends, your managers, and your teammates, they might also have their own reasons as to why. And you guys can combine your answers. The goal of asking these questions is to help you find clarity. Another thing you can do after you've gotten that initial hypothesis is continue asking yourself why 7 times. There are scenarios in the business that you might want to explore. So for example, if your answer to why you want this database is, well, we just want to have better reporting on our finances, you might ask, well, why do I want better reporting on our finances? And that could be because you're a retail company who has some seasonality you want to take care of. So you want to understand how much your business is fluctuating between the seasons. Then you ask, well, why do you care about the fluctuations? Well, it might be because of your cash flows. So what it is about your cash flows then? And then you might realize, well, I care about cash flows because we need to make payroll. Then you might finally realize, after asking why again, that you're actually trying to forecast how many employees you need to hire in order to meet peak season demands. So by going down those multiple layers of why, you can figure out the root of the issue that you're trying to solve. The second question you can ask yourself is, after moving all of our data into Airtable, what kind of reporting or what kind of questions can this data help us answer? Using a nonprofit organization as an example, nonprofit organizations will often have lots of events that they're hosting, maybe volunteer events or maybe learning events. And an Airtable database could be used to track all of their volunteers and also to look at how many volunteers volunteer just once for an event or multiple times for an event. So with the data inside of Airtable, you can understand your volunteer engagement levels. The questions also don't need to be focused on reporting. You could also just help your team answer basic questions like, what is the person's birthday? What is this company's address? And instead of tapping someone else on the shoulder to ask for that information, that could be an incredibly valid question that you want to address with this database. The third question is, what kind of reporting can this database give me? Understanding the reporting you want to see is so helpful because it forces you to start with the end in mind, Do you want to see how your sales team did over the last year or quarter? Do you want to know how many projects your implementation team completed over the course of the lifetime of the business? Or you can also ask questions like, how many employees have we hired over the last year? Understanding what types of reporting you want to see out of this database will also help you decide what information you need to collect up front. For example, if you're trying to understand how your sales team performed over the last year, you're going to want to know who was the account manager or who was the salesperson on those deals, what was their conversion rate, and who are all of the leads that your team has spoken to, whether or not they've converted into clients. And getting that lead in as soon as possible into Airtable is going to help you track your conversion rates throughout the process. The fourth question you can ask is, what is redundant in my day right now? Understanding this will help you determine how you can save time by using Airtable. We had a construction client who told me about a special concept he had called a chair pivot. It literally consists of him turning from one desk to another desk in order to write down and copy out information from one piece of paper to another. Most clients we see use some form of spreadsheets, and they might use anywhere from 5 to 20 different spreadsheets. So that creates a lot of redundancy in the data entry. And at some point, you have to ask yourself and your team, well, how much time are we spending entering data into our 5 different spreadsheets? Thanks for investing in your own knowledge base. I'm Cherry Yang, the founder of Claribase. We're going to be releasing our flagship course, Airtable Mastery, for free. In the course, you can find over 100 videos on topics like design, integration, automations, and interfaces. It's perfect for the Airtable champion who wants to build their database right the first time. You can sign up for the course at the link down below. The fifth question you can ask yourself is, am I happy with my current processes? By evaluating each step of your current process, you can build a process map to articulate what the current workflow is. Getting to the bottom of understanding your current workflow is incredibly important, because unless you have a very structured and predefined workflow that your team can stick with, it's going to be very hard to actually move your processes into Airtable. I always say half of our work is understanding the client's needs and then translating that work into a database. So that first part of understanding what you need and how to make adjustments, whether to simplify or to streamline, is super important. And the pro tip here is that after you've figured out your current processes, this is the ideal time to really improve upon them and make any adjustments so that they're future-proof. We don't want to get into a situation where you build your current processes into Airtable, but 2 weeks later have to change them. So as you're evaluating your processes, make sure you're thinking about what your team is going to need 6 months from now, or a year from now, or 2 years from now to really make this process and workflow scalable as your team grows. The sixth question you want to ask yourself, it's a follow-up to what we just discussed. The question is, what will your future processes look like? When you're thinking about your future processes, it's important to think about what your team will need to do 6 months, a year, or 2 years into the future, so you can set up your database in a scalable way. So at the end of questions 5 and 6, you're going to have a process map of your current process, and then you're going to think about changes you want to make in your future process. And the second process map you're going to build is for your future process that you're going to follow. The seventh question you will ask is, who are all of my stakeholders in this process, and how will they be interacting with the Airtable? Very often, when you're building a large process inside of Airtable, you're going to have multiple teams that touch this database. For example, you might have a sales team where the data originates from, so they will be entering the data as they're on their sales calls. Once that opportunity is turned into a deal and the client has signed, then you might pass them on to an account manager. So there's a handoff there between the sales team and the account management team. After the account managers are involved, they might pull in the manufacturing team or the production team as well for that deal. As the deal is getting completed or the manufacturing team is working on this, there might be project managers, assignees from the project team who might also interact with the database. So you have lots of different stakeholders touching different parts of the client's lifecycle. After the project ends, you might loop in the accounting team to manage the account payables and account receivables as well. Because there can be so many different stakeholders that touch this Airtable, it's incredibly important to understand how they're going to interact with the base itself and with each other. So you need to understand and map out precisely when the handoffs happen in your process and at what point is your stakeholder going to enter different pieces of information into the database. Question number 8, and our last question, is when you have multiple team members or multiple different stakeholders working inside of your Airtable, what are the inputs and outputs for each team? Let's take that sales, account management, and production team as an example. The sales team is going to receive inputs either from their website form where they collect different information on requests, and you can integrate those requests into Airtable through an automation. So that would be an input for the sales team. An output for the sales team could be information that the sales team is passing on to the account management team, or it could be documents that are generated by the sales team. For example, you can generate contracts automatically through Airtable. By understanding what your inputs and outputs are, you can ensure that the teams will give each other information that they need. And that minimizes the chance that your team member from the account management team is going to tap onto the salesperson's shoulder and ask them, hey, who are all of my client contacts I need to get in touch with, or what are their phone numbers and emails? Because in theory, all that information should have been captured by the sales team and passed on to the account management team when the handoff happens. I also want to elaborate a little bit more on the outputs. We talked about a couple of types of outputs like contracts that get generated and data that gets passed on to the different teams. Inside of Airtable, there are automations that you can use to create different types of outputs from your data. Now, that could be documents that get generated, that could be calendar invites, that could be email notifications to your teams. So make sure you're being creative about how those outputs and how those inputs and outputs will fit into your process. When you're thinking about redundant work that you're doing every single day, you can also think about the different types of emails you might be sending to your customers, giving status updates. For example, a manufacturing company might need to tell every single one of their clients when their expected ship date is going to be for the product that they're manufacturing. And that's a prime example of an email that doesn't take you all that long, but depending on how your company is planning to scale and grow, that could mean 50 emails a week to 200 emails a week. And even though those emails only take you a few minutes, that's going to have a lot of limitations on your time. So make sure you're thinking about the repetitive processes in and outside of Airtable that take up time in your day. With the email example, you can simply merge data from your Airtable into an Airtable automation, send that email automation out to your customers. Another example of this could be when you send out weekly emails giving status reports or daily emails giving status reports. For example, what deals have been sold in the last 24 hours. You can also automate that kind of daily digest or weekly digest email using Airtable. So to summarize, we've got 8 questions that are going to help you figure out what kind of database you want to build. To get to the bottom of these questions, you're going to have some tips along the way to help you. You can ask why 7 times. You can write down all of the thoughts that you have. You can speak to other people like your manager, your employees, your friends to just test your hypothesis and have someone to brainstorm with. Lastly, you can create diagrams like process maps to help you visualize the conversations you've been having and to help you communicate with other people.